months and the next year, you're going to see all of the staff from the Butte-Silver Bow Public Archives. We all know what Kim does, and Kim does a great job with the brown bag lunches. Yay, Kim. She is the star of the brown bags. But we felt that it might be kind of nice if we talk about what do we do here? What do we do here at the archives? I think a lot of times people are kind of really curious about how things happen, how we get things, and what we do with them. And so I got to start with this little collection that came in last year. And I want to talk about the size of our collections are massive. We have newspapers, we have government record, we have all of kinds of people's individual papers like these letters, we have diaries, and the whole collection is very comprehensive. So if you have a question about Butte, you can answer it in any one of our collections. And so as I start to tell the story of the Lowry-Thorn papers, you will also see where we reached out into our other collections to inform on things in this collection. So let's see if I can do this. So the letters from the Lowry-Thorn Collection cover just from early in 1884 until January, February of 1886. So it's really a snapshot of a time that we really don't have a lot of documentation of what happened here. And it's wonderful to have a first-hand account of a day-to-day activity of a person living in Butte in what was a very high energy and interesting time because it was very early in our establishment as a city. So the letters are written by Claire Lowry. So this is Butte in 1884. And this image is from the Smithers collection, which I'm sure you all have heard that we have. And I think that this is actually a Frank Ward etching that was in that collection. So this is the east side of Main Street, from Broadway to Park Street, looking down the hill. And this is the city that Claire Lowry would come to. In 1884, we had a population of 12,000. We had over 300 mines that were being worked and 4,000 claim locations. There were 9 quartz mills, 4 smelting works, and over 3,000 miners, wood choppers, teamsters, and nearly 13 million tons of copper were being produced. And the payroll was over $600,000 a month. So that's 1884. In 1885, the population was 21,000, doubling itself. The brick ordinance was in place, and the city was starting to be built as a brick city. This is sort of the city that we still have remnants of. The railroad was fairly new to Butte, and mining was really booming. Hotels were selling floor space because there were not enough rooms for the people who were coming into town. So this is a city that Claire Lowry would come to. I'm going to make him Irish, I'll as you can see. He traveled to Butte in the fall of 1884 to work for his brother at the King and Lowry Saloon. It was a famous saloon in Butte. Thomas Melvin Lowry was the owner, and so was Silas Fish King. And so we have the King and Lowry Saloon. It was on Main Street. Claire had stopped on his way to Butte to visit his brother in Fredericksburg, Iowa. And while visiting his brother, his sister-in-law's sister was there. And he and the sister-in-law, Nellie, kind of struck up a little love affair. And the letters that we will be talking about are from Claire to Nellie. And it's a wonderful story. So I just had a wonderful time with Dick Gibson in the reading room because I said to him, the King and Lowry Saloon is listed at 296 or 269 Main Street, and I just can't find the documentation that will put me in front of that building. And the two of us spent a great deal of time looking for where this would be located. But we now know for a fact it is on Main Street, just above Park Street, on the west side of the street. And we think the building still exists, and we will prove that point to you. So the King and Lowry Saloon was sort of a clearinghouse of information. It had a billiard room. It was a big gaming stop. You could go in there and bet on the racetrack for the next day. There was a lot of gaming that was going on in all kinds, not just a card game. And we'll talk about a number of things. The King and Lowry Saloon also served as a bank of some sort. So we feel that this building is essentially where the M&M is. It was owned by Silas King and Mel Lowry. Silas King was very early to Butte. He was a friend of James Murray. And he was a mining entrepreneur. He owned a lot of mining claims. He owned the King and Lowry Saloon. He owned a number of rental properties. And Thomas Melvin Lowry, who also came here in the 1860s, was a businessman. He was a partner with the Valletons in a livery stable. And he and Silas King started their business in 1878 at the Centennial Billiard Club Room. And by 1879, they changed the name to the King and Lowry Saloon. Now, Thomas Melvin Lowry, who was called Mel, was also the first sheriff in Butte. And he had two addresses when living in Butte. One was on the corner of Washington Street, near Galena. And I can't tell you which side of the street. The city director is pretty vague. But then he moves to 3 North Excelsior Street. Melvin Lowry came to Montana after serving in the Civil War. He fought in the Battle of the Big Hole, and he had various business interests. And he was the first sheriff. So, I love this. 1884, bird's eye view of Butte. The first letter that Claire writes to Nellie, he says, the city was crowded with humanity. Great entertainment, theaters, and a roller rink. The city hosted many impressive saloons, lots of mining activity, and the bars operated 24 hours, 7 days a week. Claire writes that there is constant talk about the mines and the theaters. He writes to Nellie that he has to work the long shift. And the long shift, he gets up at 5 in the morning and goes to work. He talks about being able to leave work in time to get to the theaters, which we think would be about 7 in the evening. And he talks about going to the theater every night. He goes to some form of entertainment. He lives with another bartender who sometimes works the long shift with him, and sometimes he doesn't. Sometimes he has other things he does. I think the guy is a mining prospector. He says to Nellie, I saw the great tragedian, Lawrence Barrett. This is the theater that he would go to. It was the Grand Theater. And he sends Nellie, with this letter, the brochure that shows he paid $250 to go to the theater. He talks about what he sees at the theater in every letter. He paid $2.50 for the ticket. Nellie is really strict with him. She is not happy about him working in a bar. She's not happy about the gambling. She's not happy about the theater going. So he writes that he's working in the saloon and gambling hall, but he doesn't take part in any other mischief or activity. And he discusses the election of Grover Cleveland, and he says that the Democrats held a torchlight procession and a big bonfire in Butte. And the whole of humanity on the street made him a little nervous, which I thought was kind of fun. So we've seen that before here. So he does say that Butte is the liveliest and the best, not morally, but in the way of business. He talks about the streets being so busy that a person can hardly get along. And tonight, a prize fight will be held. The award is $1,300, and he describes the mining claims and how mining works to Nellie, and he sends her ore samples, which is just wonderful. Nellie writes back about the gambling and tells about his niece, which is also her niece, and the activities that are going on in Fredericksburg. So this was a thing I discovered, and I thought this was wonderful because I did not know about this. So these were in the paper all the time. I hereby challenge you to fight me a fair stand-up fight according to the London prize rings. 2 weeks from signing articles for the $100 to $250 aside and the gate money. The winner take all. His forfeit of $100 is at King and Lowry's. Silas King is holding my money. Some of these prize fights have prizes that are upward of $3,000 to $5,000. I'm astounded. You know, I always thought these fights happened in some alcohol-induced something where you're just throwing punches in the bar. But this is such a fascinating component of our history that I did not realize. And this is how people made money in gambling. And since King and Lowry were the sort of the holders of the cash, it was interesting to me. So here's another prize fight. And I left this one because Frank McCormick is the boxer. Now, Frank McCormick still has descendants that live in Montana. I think the guy lives in Helena. And I love this because Frank McCormick, we have a picture of him winning a prize for a dance marathon in 1880 at the Renshaw Hall. So, but he's a fighter. And that is not him in that photograph. It's just an illustrated photograph. But when you see these ads, I'm so fascinated by that. So at Christmas, he sends Nellie a note saying, I have never been so cold in all my life. It is 24 below zero here. Well, welcome home. He talks about the new amphitheater, and he tells Nellie that in March of 1885, there's going to be a greased pig chase at the rinks, and he thinks that is fabulous. It's the latest entertainment. Now, the amphitheater was on the corner of Granite and Alaska out here. You know, sort of across from the Silver Bow building. And it was a massive, massive building. So he talks constantly, when he's not working, he is going to some kind of an event. He said, the town is full of entertainments. I did not go to the greased pig chase. I attended an athletic entertainment the other night at the Opera House. He reports to Nellie that it was very good entertainment, but a fella fell off the trapeze, but it didn't seem to hurt him much. The grand opening of the amphitheater roller rink had a masquerade carnival. he did go to this carnival, and he loved going there. He also writes to her about St. Patrick's Day in 1885 and how the Irish had a parade and celebrated big on that day. So, he works and he goes to entertainment, and I love that. He talks about Mel, who has left the King and Lowry saloon and sold his share to a man named Mosby. So it's now the King and Mosby saloon, and Claire reports that Mel is the new sheriff, and they're really rounding up all the vagrants. Now, we could go to our early police record and document the arrest of those vagrants, because we have all those vagrant books from that time frame, and see who was arrested under this new sheriff and how he was imposing rules and laws about being on the street, how you'd behave. Mel continues to manage the livery, and he starts an investment business. Thomas Melvin of Hamilton and Lowry and Company. He must have done really well then, because that's shortly after that he moves to 3 North Excelsior. He reports on the railroad activity. He goes down and looks at the railroad and how the trains are coming in and the mass of humanity that gets off of the train in Butte. He now is sort of late in 1885, and he's been writing to Nellie for over a year. And he sends her this wonderful letter, and he says, I think that we need a better understanding between us. I think I love you, and I hope that you will reciprocate my feelings. So that letter goes out to her, and she writes to him and says that she does reciprocate his feelings, and that he hopes he's behaving. And that she doesn't like how far away he is, living in Montana. Then the letters stop, and they stop for 2 months. And she sends a letter finally 2 months later saying, I haven't heard from you. What has happened? So, in October, he sends a letter. He's been sick with the mountain fever for several weeks. He can barely sit up. Mrs. Pierce must write the letter for Claire. In the next letter, there are a whole series of this with the very shaky handwriting. In the next letter, Claire is able to write, and it's November, late November. But the letters stop again, and then Mrs. Pierce starts to write the letters. She says, we think he will get along now. He has almost died twice. Dr. Whitford has come in and seen him, day and night. Dr. Whitford was an early mayor here, and he was an eclectic physician, and he had a hospital on the corner of Montana and Mercury Street there, sort of kitty corner from where the fire department is. And that hospital treated drug addictions. But he was sort of a natural path, really. But he had a lot of medical success in our community. He was not very well respected by his peers, but he had a large number of patients. So I thought it was interesting, because we have a lot of information on Dr. Whitford, that he's in Claire's letters. The baby, Claire's brother Melvin, is married to a young woman, and her mother is Mrs. Pierce. And Mrs. Pierce lives with them. Claire has moved in because he's near death, and their baby gets sick with mountain fever as well. So Mrs. Pierce writes to Nellie probably weekly, telling her about the status of Mel's health. And she talks about the baby and they both lose their hair and are very, very weak. By January, we find in the Butte Minor that typhoid is rampant in Butte, in Montana as well. So we realize that mountain fever really is the typhoid. Mel finally gets Claire strong enough. He lost 40 pounds, lost his hair, and he finally gets him to agree to go to Denver, where he can get a little better medical treatment. So Claire travels in January of 1886 to Colorado, and he rides on his own to Nellie. And by February of 1886, he is in Fredericksburg, Iowa, and marries Nellie Thorn. And the rest is history. And when I was in the reading room with Dick, he said, we realized that when Silas King in 1889 sold his share of the King and Lowry Saloon to a guy named Martin, and it became Martin and Mosby of the M&M Saloon.
Oh, wow.
So, thank you, Dick. So that was great fun.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yes, so when we get these letters, now I'm going to talk archive. The letters came, and we put the letters into an archival sleeve so you can read them. And we put them in chronological order. And there is a document in here that sort of summarizes what is in each letter so that we have that content. We create a catalog record that is in our software that explains the context of these letters. When they came, who donated them, some biographical information about the donor, biographical information about Lowry, Melvin Lowry, and then we look at Silas King, and so that we have a real picture of who is being spoken about in these letters. What is wonderful is to get that program from the Opera House and Renshaw Hall. And you all know that Renshaw Hall is where the Terminal Meats is, and is still, it's the same building. And we see that the Renshaw Hall has room for 1,000 people. And that is a wonderful gift to us because we now can see who was there, what date it was. We can go to the paper and see what the paper says about that theatrical performance, and we have this letter. So this is a little historian's treasure trove. So our catalog record then is uploaded online at buttearchives.org. And hopefully if you're out there looking for King and Lowry or gambling or any activities, I think typhoid is now a search term that would pull up this collection so that your researchers could find this online by going to our website. And I'm now finding that if I just Google like King and Lowry, our collections will pop up. I'm impressed with that. I found that in Google a couple of days ago, so I was really pleased with that. Because sometimes these are unique, they don't exist in other places. This is one series of letters to and from individuals, so there's nothing been published out of here, but it's out there on the internet. A handwritten letter from 1884. Yes, we're thrilled to have them. So that's what we do with this. And then if you were to come in and ask to see this collection, we would give you a pair of gloves and sit you down and let you interpret these in your way. I interpreted them in my way. So that's mine. That's my prerogative, as most historians get to do. So it's wonderful. We also have all of the envelopes with their little stamps, and so it's really a great picture of a time in our history. So does anyone have any questions?
No.
Yeah, Cindy?
Yes.
Well, I have to say, my house was built in 1885, just above the Copper King Mansion. It's a very modest little working cottage. But it was the 1884 to 86 is when the mansion, the Copper King Mansion was built. Johnny's up there somewhere in the front row. Was there any other ephemera in the envelopes, like photographs or anything other than the theater tickets?
Yes, there was the letters, there's photographs of the Thorn and Lowry family. There are no photos of Butte.
No photos of Nellie?
No,
Oh,
yeah, heartbreaking, yeah.
I noticed they have these telephone poles there. Did they have electricity back then?
Yeah, telegraph, and they did. We had electricity 1881.
81?
Yeah, and it came, the electricity came from the dam in Great Falls and to light the mines, copper. Electricity is really, we talk about our history being about copper, but really it's all about light, electricity, because we electrified America, and that made it, that is why we're really important, it's that. Yeah, Dick?
Just to add on to that, the first public electric plant in Butte was 1884, same time, and it was down there behind where the Blue Range is now.
Right, electric brush and light,
Yes.
right? Yeah,
The address for the bar is 200, but yet you identified it as the M&M location. Did North Main Street start farther down Park Street?
well, Dick and I we just had this conversation because the numbers, they did something weird. So you had like the corner of Park and Main, and it went 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. But Dick had a really good point. He thinks that when they started, that maybe it was Mercury Street, that they started the counting up.
Mm-hmm.
But it was really tough for me to kind of pinpoint that address because all of the Sanborns have this weird 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 on each corner of the street, which is really unusual. And then in 1888, we start to see numbers. But the block on Main Street, which would be the block between Broadway and Granite, is that right? Yeah, Broadway and Granite. It only went up to 227. So I had a 269 in the city directory here, and I'm thinking, this is crazy. So I asked Dick, because he's done a lot of this kind of thing, and we went and we're not quite sure how that evolved. Because then we found that King and Mosby were at 31 North Main, and then Martin and Mosby were at like 23 North Main, and finally 7 North Main. So we think that it took a while for the numbering system to gel. But that is worthy of taking a look at because it's interesting. And it would help us clarify what we're really talking about with this address. Because it wasn't until we saw Mosby and Dick said Martin and Mosby that we pinned down the M&M. Yeah.
Well, you may have mentioned it, but where did you get that collection?
Anne Thorn Lowry. And she's a woman, probably 65, 70 years old, who had these in her family, and she wanted to donate them back here. She is an academic. She lives in Colorado. She didn't think it was appropriate to have them in her family. She doesn't have anybody who really was interested in them. And she called us and asked us if we wanted the first sheriff's papers. And we said, sure. And then this is what she brought, was this wonderful little snapshot of 2 years in the life of Clarence Lowry. So, yeah. And how she found us, that's always a really fascinating thing to me, is she did find us online when she did Butte. So she did find us that way, but you know, a lot of places don't have archives, but she did find the archives, which I thought was really interesting, because you know, it's a weird thing to be looking for. Frankly, you know, a lot of people don't look for archives unless you're in an academic setting or a, you know, work in research or something. So it was wonderful. Yeah, Jill.
Do you have some sort of idea how long a letter took that they sent back and forth? I don't know, I'm sure it would be by train or something, or
Yeah, it about a week.
a week time.
Yeah. So we looked at the dates, you know, she writes, received, you know, he writes on December 2nd, you know, a week later, she's writing saying, I received your letter today, and you know, so about a week.
And then I have one other thing to add. In looking through the Christopher Colombo Lodge notes, I have a meeting in December of 1884 with who attended it and things like that. And I noticed in one of your first pictures there was sort of Neederville and McQueen were sort of, you know, in that one 1884 overview.
Oh, the bird's eye.
Flyover of Butte or whatever it was. And
So did that meeting happen? You know, your lodge met in 2 or 3 different places.
yeah, I did find that out, but if you look at that, it looks like McQueen
Yep.
and Neederville are sort of,
Right in here, right, Jim? Or, yeah.
no, I
No, up
think
here?
they're up there, up high in the right-hand corner.
Yeah, Neederville would have been for sure there.
Yeah.
That's where
Yeah.
the smelting and
It
different
has-
things are starting.
But
It had a different name, like Gunderson or something like that.
Yeah, Gunderson, the
the
post office.
lodges, like even the Hibernians and the rest of the fraternal organizations must have been
For-
pretty functional or in that period, right?
Sure. The AOH was here as early as 1880. Yeah, and I think your lodge, 1884, is that our earliest for your lodge?
That's the first one I've been in, you know.
Huh. Actually, you know, it's a pretty good sized city, and it's a pretty sophisticated city by that time because they're building with brick. And the railroad is here, and the mines are going, and the banks are, you know, a lot of financial institutions, and, you know, so things are pretty sophisticated. Yeah, Dick?
Just while you're on that, to point out to people, if they're not familiar with that, if you get the online version of that and zoom into it, it is almost photorealistic. The
Really?
drawings are beyond belief accurate when you compare it to the 1884 Sanborn map. The Pavilion Theater, the auditorium that the amphitheater you were referring to over here, it has a little change house on the side of it. It's just like a closet practically. It's in that photo, or in that drawing.
So that would be up in here, I
The
think.
detail is not to be believed.
How do you get on that
Yeah.
picture?
This is a wonderful, you know, when you think about it, this is Missoula Gulch. So, you know, the hospital is over in here, probably where this mine is. And so, you know, when you think about the city, you know, a lot of this is still, we can still walk the streets and touch these buildings. Yeah. Yeah, Suzanne.
I just looked up from an inflation standpoint what $2.50 was equal to in 1884. It says $64.48.
Tell the Mother Lode Theater.
There you go.
I think that's what they're charging.
That's what you paid. I was gonna say that's what you paid for Mother Lode.
Unless you're,
Boy, that's great.
yeah.
That's a fun fact. All right. Yeah, Joe.
Would an archivist follow up on Claire when he moved back to Iowa, or is that a historian's responsibility?
I think that's a historian's responsibility, because I think that there are other papers that relate to these people, but we are only interested because we have a collecting policy And our collecting policy says that we will only collect within the boundaries of our county. So we're really not supposed to hold things that are outside of Butte-Silver Bow. That's our boundary. Of course, we have broken that rule, and collected based on the industry. So we have things like from the BAP Railroad that reach to Anaconda, but we would not want to be holding anything from Fredericksburg, Iowa, or from Illinois, where Claire was from. And so we would love to know more about what happened. Anne Lowry, when she gave us this collection, did give us a little sort of summary that they married, they had children, and they have stayed in Fredericksburg, that a lot of the descendants are still there. So we know that. They know that these papers are here. So if a historian were interested, they could come from here and then head to Fredericksburg. And hopefully they would find it online, that they would find that relationship online. Yeah. So, the King of Lowry Saloon. So, on St. Patrick's Day, when you're drinking your green at the M&M, you can realize that you now know something that happened there in 1880. Yeah. But how about that prize fighting thing? Did anyone know that? I did not. And you know, Cornish wrestling is advertised the same way. It's fascinating to me because you just don't know those things, and it's wonderful to discover things. See, I love my job. And I'd rather be doing this than the budget. That has to get done as well. So, and I didn't know, Dick, where can you go online to look at this?
Library of Congress.
Library of Congress. And there's also an 1891 bird's eye view.
It is by no means as good as that one.
Oh, really?
No, they're not
Yeah.
comparable.
And it pulls up in a big enough format that you can.
No, you have to download it. It's probably like about 180 megabytes.
Okay. Yeah, I have never done that. I kind of. Well, you know, I just kind of go to the newspaper, and I open it, and I go to the book. But that's great to know, because sometimes people ask questions. I bet we could find Cindy's house on there. Have you looked online at this?
85 though was built, so that's an 84 map, just before
You
that.
can find the Mountain View Church, the previous one, and it looks just like the photos of the Mountain View Church. The
Really?
previous one.
Fascinating. I think that's St. Patrick's School there. That's where I went to grade
That's the
school.
Caplice block, I think. Come-
You think this is the Caplice block?
Yeah, come forward and to the left a little bit, and St. Patrick's is on.
Oh, there's the church.
Yeah, that's it right there.
Oh, wow. So, I don't know if that's a school or not.
Is that the reservoir up there, just where you have it? Is that just go up a little, right, up there?
I don't know what that is, Jim. God bless us, we don't know. What is that?
We have to go to the Library of Congress.
That one you were just pointing at?
Yeah, what is that?
That's the,
Isn't that the reservoir? Not that you know what I mean, the one that's right on the way to Walker.
That's actually the amphitheater she's talking about, the skating rink that was just over here. It's right there, right there, that's the courthouse.
Okay,
A little bit that way, right there, that's the courthouse.
okay, and that's the amphitheater.
And that's Alaska Street between them.
And what's this kind of open space? Is that just open space?
On the
Right.
Sanborn map up there, it's labeled something like cow pasture.
Okay. Well, this is in horse and buggy days. There was a big livery up there by where Larry Dugan lived, right, where Irene lives. Yeah.
Yeah, you said back in '84, there was how many thousand people, 2,000?
In 1884, there was 12,000 people. But in 1885, there was 25,000
So there
people.
were a lot of immigrants back then.
Yes, there were a lot of immigrants. We have a really fascinating map of Ireland that, so 1884, they were pushing copper instead of silver. Silver market was getting fragile, and so they're pushing copper, and they know that now copper will be used to electrify the country. So they're calling for copper miners. And in the southwest area of Ireland, on the Beara Peninsula, they have big copper mines. And in Waterford, they have big copper mines. And so they're calling for these miners. And they're also having a big shutdown of mining in those areas in Ireland. So there is a huge influx of Irish. And they have gone to Cornwall and brought the Cornish, because the Cornish could sink the shafts. And that was their job on the hill, was to sink the shafts. And so then the Irish were coming in droves. And there were a lot of Chinese and a lot of Italians, we know, because Jim has these documents in the Cristoforo Colombo Club. If you ever want to see artwork in writing, this is the collection. Gorgeous stuff. Beautiful records. So we know that we have those major populations at that time. That early 1870, 1880 was post-Civil War, people leaving. They just couldn't cope, so they headed west, and it was a great opportunity for them. So we found the populations in the late 1860s, early 1870s is mostly Americans, post-Civil War soldiers, and people, leaving the East.
There was also a lot of people coming up from the Comstock at that time. The silver mines down there were dying, and
Good
it was a
point.
natural move just to come up here.
Right. And they had a relationship with Marcus Daly out of the Comstock, and they, in the newspapers, they're hot water miners, which is a fun term, because the mines here were so hot. Yeah, thank you.
Most of travel, it's sort of illustrated by a train, looks like it's heading up to Helena and Great Falls there. Most people got here by train.
By train. In the 1880s, yes. Because the Utah Northern had gotten here about 1881. And it came right up off of the UP out of Crane, Utah, and came in. And then Big Jim Hill, Marcus Daly's buddy, was, that's that train that you see there. And UP is down here. Yeah. It's interesting history, our railroad history. We have a great collection of railroad books in our library if anybody's interested in railroads, because John Lahr was a great collector and he left us his manuscripts, his library. It's a wonderful collection. All right. Well, now I've kept you here for 45 minutes.
That was great.
Thank you.